welcome to lesson 7.3 on congruent polygons. I gotta warn you, this lesson's got a lot of information in it, so make sure that you stay with me. Congruent polygons have the same size and shape. So that means that you can flip them, rotate them, slide them, and they will eventually fit right over top of each other so you can't see the one beneath it. What you can't do is drag one to make it bigger or smaller, or squish it to change its shape to make them match. If you have a congruent polygon, it means that the corresponding angles and sides are also congruent. So once you know a polygon is congruent, it means all of its angles that correspond are congruent and all of its sides that correspond are congruent. So for example, in this figure, we have that angle T corresponds to angle L. YV corresponds to MP. So YV corresponds to MP, and they both have one tick mark to show that they are congruent to each other. R corresponds to K. So I could show that by doing 2 there and 2 there. That shows that it's different than angle L, but that it is the same as R. You can write VTRY is congruent to PLKM. Notice that the order matters. So VT and PL are sides that correspond to each other. And so the order that you start in and the order you go around has to be the same to show their congruence. That's really, really important. The tick marks in the diagram tell you which side are congruent, and that's kind of what I was showing you right there. So if I wanted to show that this side was congruent to that side, I could do 2 tick marks there and 2 tick marks there. On this side, I could do 3 tick marks, and here I could do 3 tick marks to show that those are corresponding sides. When you name congruent polygons, you must list the corresponding vertices in the same order. Super important. Let's look at our first example, writing congruent statements. Write a congruent statement for the congruent figures at the right. So here I have 2 figures, and notice that one is rotated to not be the same. Try to see which way it was rotated. Can you see it? All right, so if they're asking for a congruent statement, they want you to say which angles and which sides are congruent to each other. So angle R is congruent to, and then you'd have to find its matching corresponding vertice, and is angle L. Okay, point L, which is referring to angle L. Angle S congruent to angle K, and you can turn your paper to help you figure that out. Don't do guesswork on these. T and J and W is congruent to N. So, and then you would make a statement. This is a congruent statement that lists the whole figure in the right order that's matching all the lines. It means that R and L are congruent to each other. S and K are matched. W and N are matched. Try the quick check. Write a congruent statement for the congruent figures at the right. So you got to find which ones match, use those little tick marks to help you, and write a statement saying that they are congruent in the right order. Go to page 2. This is how we can show that triangles are congruent. So congruent figures, all their angles and all their sides are congruent, but you don't need to know every angle measure and every side measure to prove that 2 triangles are congruent to each other. Instead, you just have to find one of these 3 proofs. And these are something you're going to want to memorize because you will need to know them in geometry in high school. The first one is SSS, side, side, side. If you get all 3 side measures and you find out that they all have a corresponding one. So if this triangle, you found out that this side was 5, this was 10, and this was 15, and that this was 5, this was 10, and this is 15, you can prove they are congruent to each other. Side, side, side is your proof. You also could find a side, an angle in the middle of it, and then another side. The order of these matters. It can't be this angle and then those two sides. The angle has to be smushed between the two sides. Or you could find a side smushed between the two angles. So notice these are kind of the reverse of each other. All three sides, side, or angle, side, angle. Those are the three to memorize. The order matters. Congruent triangles show that each pair of triangles is congruent. So we've got a side, an angle, and a side. Side, angle, side. Side, angle, side. So would be the congruent statement for this. Now, if it asked you to list the angles, you really could say, angle D is congruent to angle J, angle or side TJ is congruent to KD, and all of that. For our purposes right now, I just want you to be looking for those. So for this one, we have an angle, a side, and an angle that are congruent. This one has 2, that one has 2. So this is angle, side, angle. Is that one of our things up here? Sure is. So these two triangles are congruent. All right, try C and D on your own. D I purposely included. It looks a little funky, but I'm sure you can figure out where those two triangles are that they're talking about. Let's go to page 3. You can use corresponding parts of congruent figures to find distances. This is fun stuff. We got a surveyor here, and he wants to figure out a bridge, the distance of a bridge that's going to be built across a river from point A to point B. Show that the two triangles are congruent and then find AB. So here we have that angle B is congruent to angle D. And we know that because they're both right angles. They're both 90 degrees. Then we have that BC is congruent to DC because they're labeled. They're both 70 degrees or 70 yards. And we also know that angle ACB is congruent to angle ECD because these are vertical angles. Here we have intersecting lines, and intersecting lines, we always know that vertical angles are congruent. So these are vertical. So we know that those are going to also be congruent to each other. So if we have here a congruent angle, and we have a congruent side, and we have a congruent angle. So we have angle, side, angle. So we know that these are congruent to each other because of angle, side, angle. And since they are congruent, we can find AB pretty easily. So AB corresponds to DE, and so we know that AB is 82 yards for his bridge. All right, there is a quick check. It says to use the diagram in example 3 to find each measure. Find the measure of angle E and find the measure of ACB. Go ahead and do that. Bring your work with you to class. Go ahead and get to work.